Hello and welcome back to Matt Hayes' Tottenham Blog and to a very, very special show this Friday. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Daily Telegraph reporter Matt Law to look at the latest of what is going on with Spurs in a week where we've seen Antonio Conte sacked, Fabio Paratici banned from worldwide football, and so much more going on behind the scenes. I'm really excited to get Matt's insight into the latest and what we need to know heading into the last 10 games of the season. Before we do get into that, Matt, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on to have a chat with us. For anyone who might not know about the work you do, which I know is very unlikely, can you just give us a quick background, I suppose, into your work at the Telegraph?
Yeah. My title at the Telegraph is football news correspondent. My main responsibilities are covering both Tottenham and Chelsea and actually England. Obviously, covering both Tottenham and Chelsea at the same time brings its challenges and upsets both sets of supporters, actually, who generally accuse me of favouring one or the other. But yeah, I've covered Tottenham pretty closely now, probably for the best part of 10 years, obviously through the stadium move and through the sort of transformation of the club as well. So yeah, I've seen quite a bit there.
Yeah, look, there's some very exciting times, I'm sure, in those 10 years, but at the moment things are definitely heading in the opposite direction. And there's only one place to start, really, and that is with the latest on Tottenham's managing director, Fabio Paratici. We found out on Wednesday morning that Paratici's ban from carrying out footballing activities within the Italian Football Federation has been extended to have worldwide effect. Now, this news, in typical Tottenham fashion, came just 14 hours after Paratici was plastered across Spurs platforms, telling everyone that everything was under control. Can you tell us what this could mean for Paratici's future at the football club?
Yeah, so I mean, at the moment, he's in a spell of 10 days where he's able to ask for the grounds of his worldwide ban that FIFA have extended. I'm led to believe, although FIFA unbelievably won't actually confirm this, but I'm led to believe that within these 10 days, he is able to continue to work in this country. Obviously, his ban in Italy doesn't allow him to work in Italy. Once the 10 days are up in terms of him asking for the grounds and then requesting or not requesting an appeal against the worldwide aspect of the ban, I'm led to believe at that point he will have to cease working on all football or administrative activities within the club until any such appeal is heard. Now, there could end up being two appeals. He's got one appeal that's part of the main Juventus appeal in Italy that's to be heard on April 19th. And then, as I say, he can choose to appeal just the worldwide nature of the ban as well against FIFA. Obviously, that doesn't have a date yet. But once the 10 days is up, he's effectively banned from doing anything. You know, he can't work on contracts. He can't work on the manager hunt. He can't work on transfers. Like I say, it's both administrative and sporting, which pretty much makes any work impossible for him.
And look, on the back of this news, Tottenham released a statement later Wednesday evening, which I think took a lot of fans by surprise in the direction they went with that. They claimed that they were blindsided by the decision by FIFA. They said, "We should like to make clear that when Fabio conducted the interview on club channels yesterday, neither he nor the club had any indication of this decision being made by FIFA." Now, the initial response to that from Spurs fans was, journalists have been saying for a number of weeks that the ban was expected to be extended. So what did you make of that statement that Spurs put out?
Yeah, it was an astonishing statement, to be honest with you. To base the premise of some sort of defence of the club by basically saying we didn't know what was going on is an astonishing admission and isn't really any sort of a defence, is it? I mean, you would have hoped or thought that before putting a video out with him that they would have made some sort of check. I mean, I get that they say they weren't notified about anything, but surely there's a burden on them out of professionalism just to check that there's nothing coming and check what the situation is before putting the video out of it. I mean, I've got to say the fact he was conspicuous by his absence in the original statements regarding the mutual termination of Antonio Conte's contract made me thought that they were on top of that situation. You know, it was very clear he was conspicuous by his absence in the statements, and you thought, well, he's conspicuous by his absence because they know that there's still a problem hanging over him and that there could be some sort of announcement any day that would make him being involved in that statement very embarrassing for them. So for them to then put the statement out without having checked is nonsense, really. And the statement it was very typical of the way Spurs have acted recently, where it felt like it was just trying to apportion blame here, there, and everywhere, rather than taking any responsibility for themselves.
Yeah, it's a weird direction they've taken in a lot of these things, because so much seems to be essentially just PR control and trying to keep fans on their side, trying to keep people happy, and somehow in everything that they do, it tends to go the opposite direction, and people kind of see right through exactly what their intent is there. And you said a lot about Daniel Levy in the last week or so, which I'm really looking forward to getting onto a little bit later. But just to go on a tangent for a second, there were a few reports from other journalists in the last couple of weeks that Tottenham maybe are looking for another director of football in preparation for Fabio Paratici's departure. Can you see a departure coming soon? Like, do you think that ban might be kept? And if so, do you expect Spurs to go down the route of another director of football, or could it be Daniel Levy that's gone back into taking control of the footballing decisions?
Well, in terms of Paratici's future, obviously it's in huge doubt now. I mean, just to add another aspect into this, even were Juventus to win their appeal on April 19th, and him to win any sort of appeal with FIFA, he's also still got a preliminary case hanging over him on May the 10th, which is actually whether any criminal trial will start, because at the moment this is all sporting sanctions and sporting trials. And so it was meant to be heard on Monday just gone. It got postponed through to May 10th, so he'll still have that hanging over him as well. And the direction of travel at the moment would seem to suggest that he will have to leave at some stage sooner rather than later. However, the fact he hasn't left yet would suggest that Tottenham are going to wait to see how these appeals pan out. And if he's successful with them, maybe they're going to try and cling on, because there doesn't seem any sense in sticking with him now to sort of sack him a month down the line. So it feels very much like they're going to take a view once the appeals are heard. It's very hard to see how he stays on at the moment with everything that's going on. And he's become a distraction again. You know, the termination of Conte's contract is clearly because everything around Conte with his future and his comments had become a distraction and a problem, and some people called it toxic. I never called it that myself, I hasten to add, but some people felt it had brought a bad environment around Tottenham, everything that he was saying and doing. And the fact that they've put Stellini now in place, his number two, would suggest that decision to part ways with Conte was very much about what the atmosphere was like around the club rather than the football, because not a lot's going to change under Stellini. He was his number two. But now the situation with Paratici is the same. You know, there's a massive distraction around the club. There's a toxicity around the fact that he's still in position. And that's just, so that problem hasn't really been solved. So I fail to see how he's going to stay long term. But like I say, it seems that they're going to try and wait for this appeal now. And then on your second question, Daniel clearly likes the model of a sporting director or a director of football. He's implemented it several times through his time at Tottenham. He's implemented it in different ways with different areas of responsibility. I would say Paratici's had more responsibility than any that have gone before him for a long time. And it is the modern way as well. You know, most of the top clubs have, whether they're called director of football, sporting director, managing director of football, or something else, there tends to be somebody in that kind of position. So I would imagine at some stage Daniel would go back to that if Paratici has to leave. How quickly they would do that would be a total guess, to be honest with you. And
the big question then with regards to that is, in what way does the managerial hunt go, depending on what that plan is? Because there's some managers that would operate better under a director of football, and some that might operate better with that control for themselves. So it's, again, just so much uncertainty and such a lack of clarity on the direction of the club. And the strangest part for me about all this is that Daniel Levy has parted ways with people who did much better for the club for much worse. You know, Practically some of his scouting and recruitment has been fantastic, but there's a lot of questions hanging over the managerial targets that he's identified, especially that Nuno Espirito Santo appointment. And some of the names that are floating about now are ones that Tottenham fans would really much rather steer clear of. And yet still, in the midst of all this, Daniel Levy seems reluctant to part ways there, which is, it's a case that you don't quite often see with a man like Daniel Levy having so much patience for someone within that staff. But I just want to... Oh, go ahead.
What I would just say on why I think he is keen to try and keep Paratici, or has been impressed with his work. I do think there's a slight misconception sometimes, not just among fans. I wouldn't put this on fans. I think among just football in general, of what the sporting director role is. And it's not just transfers. I mean, it is transfers. That's part of the role, and that's part of what he will be judged on. But it is a bigger role than that. I actually wrote a piece about him. It's a very glowing piece, which some people will probably hit me over the head with if he has to go at the start of the season, about some of the changes he had made in the background. And there are some very minor changes, like bringing in a branded bus, wearing club suits, the promotion of various people, the overhaul of some of the recruitment and scouting team below him. He's been very involved in diet and things like that. And I know that Daniel Levy is sort of, I was going to use the word in awe. I think in awe is the wrong word, but I know he's incredibly impressed with the breadth of his knowledge of how he thinks a big football club should be run at all levels. And I do think that he looks at that rather than just the transfers, which I would agree with you. There's an argument certainly that they've been hit and miss, and some people would say miss more than hit. But yeah, so that I just wanted to put that in, because I think that's probably a little bit more context of how Daniel judges Paratici rather than just looking at the transfers.
Yeah, I think it's a very important piece to bring in there, so I appreciate that. And just on the point of the kind of scouting network that you mentioned there, were people that he brought in such as Greta Steinson and Andy Scolding as well. Do you know if there could be changes within that backroom staff if Paratici does leave, or at this point for Spurs is simply a waiting game?
What I would say is, at least if he does have to leave, there is a structure below him. And you would imagine that Greta Steinson certainly would take on some of his responsibilities. So from that perspective, I would see that as a positive, actually, that he's actually helped bring in a structure below him that Daniel has also signed off. And that would at least bring some sort of stability if and when Paratici has to go, because there would be people who could assume more responsibility and there wouldn't be a complete void. I think whatever happens, Daniel will probably lead the managerial hunt because there's too much uncertainty around Paratici. The fear would be that you get into a situation like 2 summers ago where you almost are operating off 2 lists, because whilst Paratici can't work on it as such, there's nothing to stop him making suggestions to Daniel. But what really is the point of Daniel making too many moves on his suggestions? 2 years ago, the mess of that summer, the summer that got Nuno appointed, was the fact that they were working off a Daniel list, they were working off a Steve Hitchen list, and then all of a sudden they were working off a Paratici list, and the whole thing became an absolute, bun fight and became a farce. And they can't have a repeat of that this summer. And I think Daniel will be very, very aware of that. So I would imagine that he will very much lead it himself.
And look, like we mentioned at the top of the show, the Paratici latest isn't the only thing going on at Spurs. And you had a very, very striking paragraph in your piece on Wednesday about the crisis on Tottenham. And just to bring that, you said sources rate this as the worst crisis Levy has faced in his time as chairman of Tottenham. Both the men's and women's team do not have a permanent manager. Paratici is banned worldwide. Harry Kane's future remains in doubt. The stadium still has no name, and a season ticket price hike has been considered. You added that you heard from a couple of sources, one saying this is by far the worst it has ever been for Levy, and another that said, on top of all the problems that are obvious for everyone to see, staff morale levels are at an all-time low, and Levy has isolated himself. It's a mess. Now, the reports in the last 24 hours are still suggesting that Daniel Levy is actually in Asia on business at the moment. But what can you tell us about the current state of play inside the club?
I think it is correct. He's been in Asia. I'm not sure whether he's back. I think he might be back. I'm not sure on that, but he has certainly been in Asia. Look, in terms of him isolating himself, there's been a massive change of heads of department over the last 2 years and going back from that. And it feels like he has less and less experienced people to lean on in these situations and to take charge of different departments and things. And I've had it said to me that he's stretched all over the place because of this, and he's listening to so many different voices, and the decision making has become muddled. Now, that's just what's been said to me. I can't obviously prove that, and Daniel and people inside the club might argue differently. But certainly in terms of the crisis, there have been lots of difficult times through Daniel's reign where things have looked as though they're going to get really bad. And in fairness to them, he's pulled them round. I've written several times that I thought that they've been in terrible positions, and he's actually made decisions or things have happened that have pulled them back from the brink. But this is deeper. It's at so many different levels at the club. It's not just football. You know, they've got commercial problems. Like I say, they haven't got a sponsor name for the stadium still. They've had issues with sponsorship. Look at the South Africa sponsorship that suddenly became an absolute farce and disaster. They've got events problems where they didn't even apply for a license on the Beyonce gig. That may seem like a small, trivial, silly thing, but when you put all these things together, there's so many things that don't seem to be operating correctly at the moment, and there's so many gaps that the crisis is so far-reaching at the moment that I think that's why sources have told me that they feel it's the worst, and there's just so many fires and difficulties he's got to deal with and put out that it feels worse than at other times when there have been bad times, but it's felt more isolated to just certain areas at the club, whether it be a manager problem or whether it be a staff problem in terms of the players or what. But and you've got the Kane future hanging over him as well.
Yeah, when you listen all together like that, it's a terrifying prospect really as a Spurs fan. And the point you mentioned a second ago with the managerial hunt, when you have Levy targets, Hitchin targets, Paratici targets, all in there, some of which has been appointed. You have this mix and match of different managers throughout the last 4 years, I suppose, since the departure of Mauricio Pochettino. But that then feeds down into the squad that's there as well, and the fact that there's players from Mourinho, there's players from Conte, there's just
Correct.
Such a mix and match of things at more than one level. That means this isn't going to be an easy fix for Daniel Levy, and it's mad to think how good things were 4.5 years ago in that Champions League final with Mauricio Pochettino. Such an incredible squad there. You know, Kane had just signed a 6-year contract. Son had signed a long-term deal. It just didn't look like anything could go wrong. But somehow, in such a short space of time, everything.
And yet Pochettino foresaw it. You know, I used to cover so many Pochettino. I loved those times of covering Pochettino's Tottenham. I mean, it was exciting times for fans. It was an exciting time as a reporter. Some of the football was brilliant. The energy around the football club was incredible. It was some of my favourite times sort of reporting on any football, reporting on Mauricio Pochettino's Tottenham. I loved it. But he forewarned it. You know, he kept saying there needs to be a painful rebuild. He knew that the squad... he thought that the Champions League final was the end of a cycle with that squad, not the beginning of a cycle. And he was correct. He was absolutely correct. And I've been critical of Daniel throughout my time of reporting on Tottenham, but I can also see what good he's done for Tottenham. You know, when I started on Tottenham, Tottenham were a club that knocked around with the likes of Villa and Everton and clubs like that. And he's dragged them above that. He's got them above that, and he's modernised the club, and he's put the club in the great position. But since that Champions League final, every major decision I think has gone wrong. And the biggest major decision that he got wrong was not backing Pochettino. I mean, it was an unbelievable decision. I know we're going over an old ground here, but I wrote at the time, it was just an astonishingly bad decision. You know, they weren't going to go down under Pochettino. They needed a period of transition under Pochettino, and he wasn't prepared to give him that time, and he wasn't prepared to go through it and spend the money to do it. And ever since then, it snowballed, and every decision has gone wrong because he's looked for quick fixes since then. And I do think there is a cultural problem within this playing squad. This is where I have total sympathy for what Antonio Conte said after the Southampton match. Whether you agree with how he said it or don't agree with how he said it, I have total sympathy and understanding for the point is there is a cultural problem within that squad. And I wrote about the fact that if you look back at the Amazon documentary when Danny Rose has that infamous meeting with Jose Mourinho, and he finishes it by saying, I will go and see the chairman then. I will go and see Daniel. As a warning to Jose Mourinho, that tells you everything. Players should not feel that they can go and take it to Daniel when it's a playing grievance. And there has been an undercurrent of that within that squad. Not everybody, certainly not with everybody, but there's been an undercurrent of, we will go to Daniel, we will take it to Daniel, and we will survive and you will not survive. And that is a massive, massive problem. And that's what Antonio Conte was saying, it needs to change. We've seen an interview with Richarlison after the AC Milan game that again spoke to that sort of attitude being within the Tottenham squad. And it feels again that Daniel would rather change the coach than change the culture. On
the point of Pochettino there, because I do think it as the beginning of it's the beginning of this downfall for Spurs, and
Yeah.
it's an interesting point. Do you know if there is any sort of acceptance within the club that the dismissal of Pochettino at the time was a mistake, and could that be the reason that maybe he's on the list at the moment?
The problem I have with answering that is that there's such a void of communication from the top of Tottenham, and it's been a complaint. Pochettino used to complain about it. I think Jose Mourinho complained about it. Conte used to complain about it. It's very hard to get proper communication from the top of Tottenham, and certainly any meaningful communication. So it's hard for me to say whether there is regret. Certainly, sources have indicated to me that there's regret and there's admission that mistakes were made there. But then in terms of Pochettino being on the list now, actually, I feel that there's a real reticence to go back to Pochettino within the board for the very reason of the fact it would be a huge public admission of a complete mistake they made and a complete waste of money in the meantime, because the hiring and firing of Pochettino and the coaches in between them, I worked out not long ago, is cost in the region of £50 million. It didn't cost that to fire Pochettino, but when you account for firing Pochettino, hiring another guy, firing another guy, hiring another guy, it will have cost in the region of £50 million. And to be honest, that's a generous guess. That's a generous guess to Tottenham. Then to go round in one massive £50 million circle and have got really nowhere would be an astonishing admission of a mistake. It might be one that they should do. I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that, but I think that that's why there's a huge reticence to go back to Pochettino if they can help it. And from Pochettino's point of view, what actually has changed? To go back into Tottenham now, what actually has changed? I think he would have to have some huge guarantees about what he would be allowed to do, because he would still want to go back in and go through the painful rebuild that he was talking about back around the Champions League final. And would they be willing to let him do that and give him the power to do that? That's a massive question.
That 50 million stat is so striking. It's almost like the one you put out during the week about the trophies of Spurs managers. For anyone who might have seen that, you said that all managers appointed by Daniel Levy in his time at Spurs have, away from Spurs, won a combined total of 61 trophies, and with Spurs just the League Cup,
just the one.
It's crazy, because it's either end of the spectrum all kind of mashed into one. It's absolutely mad. But on the point of mistakes that the Tottenham board have made, you also revealed during the week that Tottenham were considering a sizable increase in ticket prices for next season. The Spurs tickets are already amongst the most expensive in the country, and look, as always, fans are sure to be vocal in their disagreement if there is going to be an increase. But what are your thoughts on this development? So
they froze the prices this time last year for this season, which was a good move, because I don't want to just hammer the club. And freezing the prices last year was a good move. It's a positive move. There have certainly been discussions about a price increase this year. There have been rumours about the amount it could be, and I don't want to repeat rumours on it. I don't think that's fair, but certainly sizable. The club, I had to obviously take this to the club, and the club's position is that there's been no confirmation yet of season ticket prices for next year. Now, that's not obviously a denial that it won't happen, but we should also point out that they're saying there's no confirmation, so it might not happen as well. My personal opinion was, if they were to increase general admission season ticket prices for next season, it would actually be morally corrupt. It would be completely scandalous, even if it was 1%. I don't think, with the cost of living crisis that people are currently going through, the struggles that people are having in their personal lives, placed against what's happening at the club at the moment, I don't think there's a single justification for it. And remember, the last accounts showed that Daniel Levy took a £500,000 pay rise, and the board between them took a £3 million pay rise. Now, the counter argument to that is that probably puts them up to the pre-COVID levels when they did take wage reductions, which was the right thing to do. But not everybody has had their pay go back to pre-COVID levels in normal life. We know that the cost of living has gone up hugely and is continuing to go up post-COVID for people. People are struggling. People are finding it difficulty. And to ask people to pay more for a product that hasn't got better, that hasn't changed, in my view, would be completely morally corrupt and would be completely reprehensible. And remember, Daniel Levy, in his statement on the Antonio Conte mutual termination, called the fans amazing. You cannot call the fans amazing and then turn around and slap them in the face like that. They haven't confirmed they're doing so. So I can't say for sure and what might have happened might change minds. They might have been heading in one direction, and what's happened with Conte and with Paratici since and what's going on at the club, they might turn around and recognise, even if we were going to rise prices, we've decided we can't now. But even a 1% pay rise, in my view, would be completely wrong.
I really couldn't agree more with you on that. And the statement that Daniel Levy put in the agreement with Conte thing, but also the week before with the fan engagement. I forget exactly what it was, but there was a line in there along the lines of, the fans lead the decision making at the football club. You're going back 10 days later and immediately, kind of disproving exactly what you said. It would be a crazy move. But
go on, sorry.
I was going to say one that I really wouldn't put past Tottenham, which is the worst part.
I mean, whether there's a halfway house in terms of putting price increases for corporate tickets and not general admission tickets, maybe that's a halfway house. And I think people would accept that, because I think people would probably acknowledge that anyone who can buy corporate tickets might be in a better situation to swallow a slight price rise. But my view on the general admission prices is that if there was a 1% increase even, it would be morally corrupt. Yeah,
I absolutely agree on that. Before we do dive into the disarray of Tottenham's latest managerial search, I want to ask you quickly about Harry Kane. Your colleague Sam Wallace told us last week about how Kane has greater control of his future than he did when Man City came knocking a couple of years ago. What can you tell us about the future of the now Tottenham and England record goal scorer?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel for Spurs fans, and I know they have a go at me for it because I end up writing a lot about it. It seems that obviously we're constantly talking and writing about Harry Kane's future. And I get that I'm an Aston Villa fan. I've been through this with Jack Grealish on a different level, and I know it's annoying, but from a professional level, you can't get away from it. Harry Kane's future, where do we start? So there's certainly not been any sign of a renewal. There's not been any positivity, but there's also not been a decision made that he's going to turn around and say it's not like a couple of years ago where we kind of already knew at this point that he wanted out. I think it's very much up in the air still. It's very much in doubt, but it's not decided one way or the other. I think my personal opinion is that there's probably only one club in England really where there's a realistic possibility for him, and that would be Manchester United, but they would still have to stump up the best part of 100 million to have any chance of signing him. And even then, Daniel Levy might turn around and say no, particularly with what everything's going on, even though that could end up costing the club a lot of money. I don't think it's even certain that Daniel would accept an 80-90 million pound bid from Manchester United for Kane. Might be different from a foreign club. Daniel has done this before with players' futures, where he set price tags so high for English clubs that it's impossible for them, but the price tag for foreign clubs is slightly different because you can swallow them moving abroad and not playing for a direct competitor in England. I think Kane would love to stay at Tottenham. I think if he does go, it would be with a very, very heavy heart. But he's getting to a stage now where, to be honest, it's getting to the big decision. I mean, he could probably leave it another year. Look, I mean, he doesn't have to do anything. He can run it down right to its last minute if he wants to. And I don't think people could criticise him for that at the moment, because if he decides that the club is in so much chaos that he can't make a decision this summer, and decides to run it down further, I don't think he can be criticised for that. I think he deserves the right almost now to choose his own future. He's done so much for Tottenham. He's broken that record now. He's stayed through difficult times. He's obviously had good times with the club. The club's been great with him, but I think now he is at a stage of the career where people should respect that he can probably choose his own career path. So look, I still think it's difficult for him to move, because if he wants to stay in England and break the Premier League record, there's probably only one realistic option, and that's Manchester United, and they're going to have to come up with an enormous offer to get him. Personally, having watched all of Kane's career from the very start at Tottenham, I would absolutely love him to stay at Tottenham. I think it would be one of the great Premier League and football stories were Harry Kane to spend his whole career at Tottenham, break the Tottenham record, break the Premier League record, and, lo and behold, maybe one day go and lift a trophy with Tottenham. Even if in quotes it were only the FA Cup, it would still be I've often imagined when Tottenham have been on their cup runs, I actually really fancied them for the FA Cup this season. And I've often imagined what it would actually be like to see Harry Kane and the emotion that would go through Harry Kane to lift that trophy with Spurs. And it would be an unbelievable moment. And I think I just always imagine him sort of in tears all over the place, because I think it would be so huge. And I would love to see that moment. I'm not a Tottenham fan. I would love to see that moment. Whether that's realistic now, who knows? But certainly it's going to be a huge, huge thing in the summer. And what you do hope is that it doesn't rumble on till August the 31st, because I think that will be bad for everybody. It will be bad for him. It will be bad for the club. I think it would be better for all. And it's probably unrealistic to think that they'll have any clarity very early in the transfer window, because it would be such a huge deal. It'd be very difficult. But certainly I think they need to have the clarity before the next season starts. Yeah,
I certainly think the general consensus is that for Harry Kane, one trophy at Tottenham would mean more than 3 or 4 anywhere else. And look, the likelihood of that trophy is rapidly fading with every line we get out of the football club. But it is something special when a player of his caliber can stay at one club for the majority of his career. And as a Spurs fan, of course, my only kind of hope going into the window and probably the window after as well is that Manchester United could be looking for more of a long-term option. I know Kane at 30 is probably the peak of his career, but how long is that going to last when United have their eyes on someone like Victor Osimhen from Napoli, and Gonçalo Ramos at Benfica is drawing more and more attention with every performance he puts in, and with Kane potentially going abroad, that Alan Shearer record is his. It's there for the taking, and I'm sure that'll be key in his decision making. It would be an absolute disaster if he didn't win a trophy in his career. And as a Tottenham fan, I could openly say that. But, people always say that for Shearer, it was fine to stay at Newcastle for so long because he won that Premier League in 95. But if anyone ever mentions Alan Shearer, you don't think 95 Premier League. You think 260 Premier League goals. You think the greatest goal scorer that the modern era of English football has ever seen. So it's, I'm sure, a dilemma that's gone back and forth in Harry Kane's head and has been for a number of years. But it would be interesting to see, more so from an external perspective, how this does pan out.
I've got a theory on Kane in terms of his longevity, though, that injuries permitting, that he can continue to be at the top of his game at 34, 35. The way his game is evolving and the way he plays and what he actually relies on to be at the top of his game, I think he can still be scoring 20, 25 goals at 34, 35. He could go on to playing 37, 38, injuries permitting. But his injuries have got better. I mean, remember, he hired this personal physio, and his ankle problems, actually, his fitness and his injuries have actually got better in the last couple of years. He's a phenomenon. He's an absolute phenomenon.
He is. He's superhuman, and it's the elimination of those injuries that I think has put him on the trajectory to break that record. But look, Matt, let's get down to business. Antonio Conte left Tottenham late on Sunday night after less than 18 months in charge of the club. And again, another stat that the 2019, when we reached the Champions League final, is actually the last season that Tottenham had a full manager in place for the full season.
That's crazy.
It's bizarre. For a top 6 club, it's ridiculous. But it's a decision that took longer than expected, but certainly took nobody by surprise. Can you tell us what went on behind the scenes between Conte's outburst on the South Coast and the statement on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. So he had obviously the outburst after Southampton on the Saturday. I got wind on the Monday that he was going to leave. It was just a matter of when. And I don't mean at the end of the season. He was going to leave before the Everton game. I wrote on that Monday that he was going to leave that week, and it just about happened by about an hour and a half because it happened on the Sunday. But he was certainly going to leave before the Everton game. Everything else was just negotiating and that great word, haggling. I mean, there was basically a week spent of haggling. And it shows probably how complicated that haggling got, that his entire backroom staff bar his brother stayed. Because that is an extremely unusual, possibly even unprecedented. I can think of staff staying when a manager goes, but that is normally club staff rather than their personal staff. I couldn't really think of another example of the personal staff staying and yet the manager going. So that would have taken a huge amount of haggling. They obviously his staff would have wanted Conte's blessing for that as well, because you've got to imagine that at the end of the season, they will go and they will one day work with Conte again. It became a mutual termination. Again, that always involves an awful lot of haggling, because you're not just sacking the guy and paying him off. You're coming up with some sort of package that's good for the both of you. I suspect, well, I know that Daniel made background checks on people like Tuchel to see whether there was a possibility of him coming in. Obviously, he ended up going to Bayern Munich. I suspect that there was a very last-minute rush around Julian Nagelsmann and whether anything could be done immediately with him. So it's a bit of a boring answer, but it was basically a week of haggling and negotiations that got them to the point they got them. It was never going to be an easy negotiation, but they got there just in the end. And I think actually what I would give them some credit for is they got there before the players came back for training from international. It would have been a mess, an even bigger mess, shall I say, had they have not got to some point of clarity by the time the players were coming back from international duty. I think that was important that they started with clarity on what was happening for the rest of the season, and they did actually achieve that.
It's a mistake they made in 2019 when they sacked Pochettino. I think it was the second Wednesday of a 2-week international break before they actually kind of made that statement. So they're learning. They're learning. You mentioned there Julian Nagelsmann is the man that's reportedly at the top of Tottenham's list at the moment. And that might change if Fabio Paratici does leave, although Spurs were keen on Nagelsmann in 2021 before appointing Nuno when Nagelsmann went to Bayern Munich. So I'm kind of hopeful they will still hold an interest if Paratici does go. Is there any update on this pursuit, or are we just waiting for Nagelsmann?
Everything in the last sort of 48 hours has sort of taken over from it a little bit, from the pursuit. But what I was told, I've lost track of my days now, but what I was told originally was that Daniel was going to start work quickly on identifying the next manager. I think we've just spoken about it. He doesn't want a repeat of 2 years ago. Doesn't mean he's going to make an appointment quickly, but he's starting work on it quickly, and he's certainly talking to people, making background checks. I know for sure that Daniel has a very good relationship with Nagelsmann's agent. They've spoken a lot in the past, both about players and about Nagelsmann. I'm told they get on well. I'm told that relationship is good. I know I wrote this, that Nagelsmann's agent has been in England this week. Now, he's got other clients. He knows other people in England, and I cannot say for sure that he was here on Nagelsmann or Tottenham business, but he has been in England, and Daniel has been away in Asia. So the two things may well not be linked. But you're dead right. They spoke to Nagelsmann and his agent back in the summer of Nuno. It became very apparent very quickly that they weren't going to be able to do it because Bayern Munich were on the scene. Nagelsmann has an affinity for Tottenham. This has been written. He's owned a Tottenham replica shirt. He would consider himself a bit of a Tottenham supporter. I don't know whether that predates the Poch era, but certainly he was very keen on them in the Poch era, and actually is a bit of a student of Mourinho too, in terms of how Mourinho deals with himself PR-wise. And I think he watched a lot of Mourinho at Tottenham as well. I think there's an opportunity there with them, with Nagelsmann. The fear is that the chaos at the moment may well put him off. But I got the distinct impression that there was definitely an opportunity for Tottenham and Nagelsmann. He will want to see what else is out there. There's going to be a lot of change this summer. Whether Tottenham can get an agreement before all that change actually takes place in the summer is unknown. But yeah, I would still have him. I would still have him as at the top of that list. But as you say, that list is subject to massive change, to be quite honest with you.
Another name on that list, on the lips of Tottenham fans as well, is Mauricio Pochettino, despite the fact there's been, again, reportedly no approach from the club yet. Do you see a return to N17 for the Argentine? And if that is something that Tottenham are to pursue, do you think Real Madrid pose the biggest threat to that reunion?
Yeah, I never want to say never, because you get caught out in football saying that. But at the moment, as we currently stand, I think it's very unlikely because of the reasons I spoke about earlier in terms of the reticence and the going back to him. And I think he would require so many guarantees that I'm just not sure that Tottenham, as they stand at the moment, could or would be prepared to give. But that's not to say, like I say never. And certainly, Pochettino's always the funny thing is the way Pochettino went, you'd imagine there would have been a fallout between him and Daniel Levy, but I don't think there was. I'm told that relationship is always maintained, been good. in the intervening years, they've gone out for dinner, they've visited each other's houses. They're still, they still have a good relationship, I'm told. Whether they want to work with each other again at this moment is maybe another matter. But there's an affection there. I think Pochettino will one day manage Tottenham again. But I think it's probably more likely after another club or at another point in time. I think if the Real Madrid job becomes available, like everybody seems to think it will, I actually would make him favourite for that job. I think that for both perspectives, it would make a lot of sense, and I could well see him doing that job. And I think he would take that job over Tottenham at the moment, with the probably the career plan of coming back to Tottenham maybe after that job someday.
My biggest fear in all of this is that, again, reportedly, that Nagelsmann and Pochettino are perhaps top of that list for Spurs, but they're top of Real Madrid's list as well. So we may end up getting the man who doesn't get Real Madrid, which could be a man who is happy to manage Tottenham and is looking forward to that challenge, but it will always be the kind of leftovers of Real Madrid. And you're also looking then at Christophe Galtier and his uncertain future at PSG. Maybe we don't even get either of them, and we go on to this long list of managers then, and a few names have been mentioned. There's Roberto De Zerbi, who's doing fantastically at Brighton. There's Arne Slot, who's was 6 points clear at the top of the Eredivisie with Feyenoord. Ruben Amorim, who we played in the Champions League. There's Luis Enrique and Vincent Kompany also on that extensive list. Before I ask you about that famous record from 2021, are there any other managers that you think we should be keeping an eye on in this?
I think Ange Postecoglou at Celtic would be, like we're saying, on that very long list at the moment. I don't think necessarily he's at the top of it, but I think he's definitely one they will make background checks on. Thomas Frank possibly, but unlikely. Might get looked at depending on how far down the list we go. But I think you've probably, off the top of my head, covered most of the bases with the guys you just mentioned.
Well, look, let's get to the question that all Spurs fans want to avoid. In 2021, it was 43 days Tottenham went without a manager, from the dismissal of Jose in April 2021 to the appointment of Nuno on the 1st of June. So as we currently stand, there are 58 days left in this Premier League season. So if Tottenham are going to wait till the end, that record is being smashed. But do you think we could end up in that situation, or is there a feeling that Tottenham might do, I suppose, the equivalent of what United did last season with Ten Hag in appointing that manager in advance, just to kind of calm the storm a little bit?
Well, look, I think that's why I wrote that Daniel will start work quickly. Is I would hope, and I'm told, that come the end of the season he'll know which direction of travel he's going in, and you would imagine and you would hope that he will know that manager that he decides on is prepared to come, so that they can do something very quickly. Whether they can get it agreed before, I think they would love to. There's no prospect of any of those managers actually starting work for the last 2 games or whatever. But I think they would love to have a gentleman's agreement with someone before the end of the season, so that they can come straight in. That would be the dream scenario for them. I think they will do everything in their power to avoid the farce of 2021. And that might mean having to pivot from a top choice to a non-top choice quite quickly, so that you don't end up waiting for someone and allowing them to string you on through the summer, only for you to then get caught out and get into a massive difficulty and problem. So I suspect a much clearer, better strategy this summer. And I can't believe they will get them. I mean, never say never with Tottenham, but I can't believe that they will allow themselves to get caught in that problem again. I think they would also claim that problem was also brought about by the fact that they were making the Paratici hire in the middle of it, and that became messy with it. It should be clearer. It should be clearer. And I think they will try and get an agreement with someone before the end of the season. And if they can't, they will at least know who for the first 2 weeks, maybe, or week, they will go for hard, and then they can have someone to pivot straight back on. But I mean, all clubs, to be honest with you, to say, I know what you're saying about fearing sort of picking up the leftovers from Real Madrid or Paris Saint-Germain or whatever, but every club outside Manchester City, Liverpool, Manchester United, Barcelona, Real Madrid are always going to be in a situation where they're slightly having to pick up someone who's not quite made it at one of the big clubs. So I personally wouldn't hold that against Tottenham if that's what they end up doing. There's far worse positions to be in than ending up with Real Madrid's second choice manager.
Look, Matt, thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate you helping us wade through the murky waters that are Tottenham Hotspur Football Club at the moment. Do you want to just let people know where they can find you on Twitter or something? Again, I know you probably don't need to, but...
I was going to say most people kind of know where to find me, and it's Matt _law_DT. I think you can find all my work at the Daily Telegraph anyway. But thank you very much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you everyone who has watched this show as well. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe down below and click the like button if you have enjoyed this, and make sure to leave your thanks in the comments for the wonderful Matt Law. But from me, for now, and as always, thank you so much for watching.